Life often leads us through seasons of waiting, times when doors remain closed, prayers seem unanswered, and uncertainty looms like a dark cloud. Have you ever felt lost, wondering if God sees your struggles? The truth is, He does. And not only does He see, but He is also working behind the scenes, preparing something far greater than you can imagine. Today, we will journey through the promises of Scripture, ancient truths that have guided believers for centuries. We will uncover how God provides even in our waiting, and how setbacks can be divine redirections leading us to something better. If you're searching for hope, clarity, and divine guidance in your job search or any life challenge, this message is for you. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more inspirational messages like this. Now, let's begin. Michael sat at his kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the heavy silence. His hands rested on a stack of rejection letters, each one a reminder of a door that had not opened. He had been searching for months, sending out applications, attending interviews, praying for a breakthrough. But nothing. The weight of disappointment pressed on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "God, where are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've done everything I can. Why do I keep hearing no?" The only response was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching into an eternity. He closed his eyes, fighting the creeping doubts. He knew the scriptures, Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." But right now, those words felt distant. He needed more than verses. He needed action. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, a woman in her 70s who had lived in the building for decades. She held out a plate of cookies, her eyes full of warmth. "Michael, I was thinking about you today," she said. "I know times are tough, but I believe God is working things out for you. You just have to hold on." Michael forced a smile. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Jenkins, but honestly, I don't see it. I've tried everything." She nodded, setting the cookies on the table. "You ever hear the story of Joseph?" He sighed. "Yeah, I know. He was sold by his brothers, thrown into prison, and then became a ruler in Egypt." "Exactly." She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "And do you remember how long Joseph waited? 13 years. 13 years of uncertainty, of betrayal, of wondering if God had forgotten him. But God never did. He was preparing Joseph for something bigger than he could imagine." Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I just don't know how much more I can take." Mrs. Jenkins reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You don't have to see the whole picture to trust the painter. God is working, even when you don't see it, even in the waiting." Her words hung in the air long after she left. That night, Michael sat on the couch, staring at his Bible. He opened it, almost at random, and his eyes landed on Psalm 37, verse 23 to 24. "The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. Though he may stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with his hand." A lump formed in his throat. Maybe, just maybe, God was still in control. Maybe this season wasn't about rejection, but redirection. The next morning, instead of checking his email first thing, he got on his knees. "Lord, I don't understand, but I trust you. Lead me where you want me to go. I surrender this to you." And for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Transition to part 2. The waiting wasn't over, but something had shifted. Michael didn't know it yet, but God was already orchestrating the next step in his journey, one that would change everything. Michael woke up with a strange sense of calm. The weight that had been suffocating him for weeks seemed lighter, as if an invisible hand had lifted his burdens overnight. He took a deep breath and reached for his phone, hesitating for a moment before deciding not to check his emails. Instead, he opened his Bible again. This time, he landed on Isaiah 41:10. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." He closed his eyes and let the words settle into his heart. Maybe he had been looking at his situation all wrong. Maybe, instead of focusing on what wasn't happening, he needed to trust in what was being prepared behind the scenes. A few hours later, he decided to go for a walk. The crisp morning air filled his lungs, refreshing him in a way he hadn't felt in months. As he walked, he found himself in front of a small coffee shop he hadn't noticed before. The sign on the door read, "Help Wanted." Michael chuckled under his breath. "All right, God, is this you?" With a mix of curiosity and hesitation, he stepped inside. The warm aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the air, and a friendly-looking man behind the counter greeted him with a smile. "Morning, what can I get you?" Michael hesitated before responding. "Actually, I saw the sign outside." "Are you still hiring?" The man nodded. "We are." "I'm John, the owner. You got any experience?" Michael hesitated. He had always envisioned himself in a corporate job, not working in a coffee shop. But before he could talk himself out of it, he heard Mrs. Jenkins' voice in his head. "You don't have to see the whole picture to trust the painter." "I do," he finally said. "I've worked in customer service before. I can learn quickly." John studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "You know what? Let's give it a shot. Come in tomorrow morning at 8 and we'll see how you do." Michael shook his hand, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. Maybe this wasn't where he had expected to be. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly where God needed him to start. Michael stepped into the coffee shop the next morning, feeling a strange mix of nerves and excitement. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and walked up to the counter. John greeted him with a nod. "Glad you made it. Let's get you started." Michael put on an apron and stepped behind the counter, watching John move effortlessly through the morning rush. Customers lined up, placing orders, chatting with one another, and filling the small shop with an atmosphere of warmth and energy. He watched as John smiled at each person, remembering their usual orders, engaging in small talk that made every customer feel seen and valued. As the first customer approached, Michael's hands felt clammy. "Good morning." "What can I get for you?" he asked, his voice slightly shaky. The woman on the other side of the counter smiled kindly. "I'll have a caramel latte and a blueberry muffin, please." Michael fumbled slightly as he punched in the order. John chuckled and patted his shoulder. "Relax, you'll get the hang of it." By midday, Michael found himself falling into a rhythm. He learned how to operate the espresso machine, memorize regulars' orders, and most importantly, engage in conversations. He had never thought of customer service as anything more than a job before, but now he saw it differently. This wasn't just about serving coffee. It was about connection, about listening, about bringing a little joy into someone's day. During a lull, an elderly man walked in and took a seat at the corner table. His clothes were slightly worn, and his hands trembled as he reached for a newspaper. Something about him struck Michael. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes. John noticed, too. "That's Mr. Thompson. He comes in every day, same time. Never says much, just sits there and reads. Lost his wife last year." Michael felt a tug in his chest. He poured a fresh cup of coffee and walked over. "Sir, this one's on the house." "Just a small way to say we're glad to have you here." The old man looked up, surprised. For a moment, Michael thought he might refuse, but then he gave a small nod. "Thank you, son. That's very kind of you." As he walked back to the counter, Michael felt something shift inside him. He had come here just looking for a job, but now he saw purpose in the smallest acts of kindness. Maybe God had placed him here not just to earn a paycheck, but to learn, to grow, to touch lives in ways he hadn't expected. That evening, as he locked up the shop, John clapped him on the back. "You did good today, Michael. You've got a gift, not just with the work, but with people." Michael smiled, a deep sense of fulfillment settling in. Maybe this wasn't the career he had planned for, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The days turned into weeks, and Michael found himself settling into his new routine at the coffee shop. What had started as a simple job was slowly turning into something more, a place of connection, of purpose, of unexpected blessings. Each morning, he greeted regulars by name, learning their stories, their struggles, and their small victories. And with each cup of coffee he served, he realized something profound. God was using him right where he was. One afternoon, as Michael wiped down the counter, the bell above the door chimed, signaling a new customer. He looked up to see a young woman step inside, hesitating slightly before walking up to the register. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes tired, as if carrying the weight of something unseen. "Hi," Michael greeted her warmly. "What can I get for you today?" She hesitated before responding. "Just a coffee, black." Michael nodded, preparing her order. As he handed her the cup, he noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Rough day." She exhaled a shaky breath, then let out a small, humorless chuckle. "More like a rough year." Michael paused, remembering the way Mrs. Jenkins had once spoken into his life when he needed it most. Sometimes the hardest seasons are just before the breakthrough. She looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. There was something in her expression, a flicker of recognition, of curiosity, of hope not yet fully formed. "You really believe that?" He smiled. "I do. I've lived it." She took a sip of her coffee, nodding slowly. "Maybe I'll have to start believing it too." As she walked to a table, Michael felt a deep sense of conviction. He had no idea what battle she was facing, but he knew that God had orchestrated their encounter. A simple conversation, a moment of kindness. It wasn't just about coffee, it was about something greater. That evening, as he closed up shop, Michael reflected on how far he had come. Just months ago, he had been the one searching, the one lost in doubt and uncertainty. But God had never left him. Step by step, he had been led to this place, to this moment, to this purpose. Before heading home, he opened his Bible, letting his eyes fall upon Proverbs 16:9. "In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." He smiled, the truth settling deep within him. The journey wasn't about arriving. It was about trusting the one who was leading the way. Michael had settled into his new routine at the coffee shop, but life had a way of testing even the strongest faith. One particularly slow afternoon, as he wiped down the counter, John approached him with a concerned expression. "Hey, Michael, can we talk for a second?" John's voice carried an unusual seriousness. Michael set the rag aside and nodded. "Of course, what's up?" John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Business has been tough lately. I hate to say this, but I might have to start cutting back hours. I don't know how much longer I can keep the shop running like this." Michael felt his stomach drop. Just when he thought he had found stability, uncertainty crept in again. "I understand," he said, though his heart pounded. "Let me know what you need me to do." That evening, he sat in his small apartment staring at his bills. Rent was due soon. His savings were running low. Doubt whispered in his ear, tempting him to panic. But instead of giving in, he reached for his Bible. Flipping through the pages, his eyes landed on Philippians 4:19. "And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus." He closed his eyes and prayed, "Lord, I don't know what's next, but I trust you." The next morning, Michael showed up to work as usual, choosing faith over fear. As he took an order from a customer, the young woman from the other day, Sarah, walked in again. This time, she looked less burdened, though something still lingered in her eyes. "Back again?" Michael asked with a warm smile. She nodded. "Yeah, your words stuck with me. I wanted to say thank you." Michael leaned against the counter. "For what?" She hesitated, then spoke. "For reminding me that hard seasons don't last forever. I actually got a call for a job interview this morning. I haven't had one in months." A grin spread across Michael's face. "That's amazing, Sarah. I told you things were shifting." Sarah smiled, but then her expression turned thoughtful. "Can I ask you something? How do you stay so hopeful when things are uncertain?" Michael paused. He could tell her about all his doubts, the moments he felt lost, the fears that still crept in, but instead, he spoke the truth he was learning every day. "Because I know God isn't finished with my story yet, and He's not finished with yours either." Later that day, as Michael cleaned up, John approached him again. "Hey, I don't know if this means anything, but one of our regulars, Mr. Thompson, said he was impressed by the way you interact with people. Turns out he owns a small marketing firm. He asked if you'd ever considered working in that field." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "Marketing? I mean, I studied business in college, but I never got a chance to pursue it." John clapped him on the shoulder. "Might be worth a conversation. He left his card for you." Michael took the card and stared at it, feeling a mix of emotions. Was this another door opening? Could this be the opportunity he had been waiting for? He exhaled deeply, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. Maybe, just maybe, God was weaving something beautiful out of his uncertainty. Michael stared at the business card in his hand. The name embossed in gold lettering, James Thompson, CEO, Horizon Marketing Group, felt surreal. He had prayed for an opportunity, but now that one was in front of him, doubt crept in. Was he ready for this? The coffee shop had become more than a job. It had become a place of ministry, of unexpected friendships, of purpose. Could he leave it behind? He wrestled with the decision all night, pacing in his small apartment, whispering prayers into the silence. The next morning, he sat across from John before the shop opened. "I don't know what to do," Michael admitted. "This could be the opportunity I've been waiting for. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" John studied him, then smiled knowingly. "You remember that first day here? You were nervous, unsure of yourself, but you stepped up. And now, look at you. This isn't just about a job, Michael. It's about trusting that when God opens a door, He's already equipped you to walk through it." Michael exhaled, nodding. "You're right." That afternoon, he dialed the number on the card. The voice on the other end was warm. "Michael, I'm glad you called. Let's meet tomorrow morning at my office." The next day, Michael stepped into a sleek, modern office building. His palms were sweaty, but he whispered under his breath, "Lord, I trust you." Mr. Thompson greeted him with a firm handshake. "I've watched how you connect with people, Michael. That's what we need. Someone who understands people, who sees beyond numbers and strategies. Tell me, why do you think marketing matters?" Michael took a breath. Because at its core, marketing isn't about selling. It's about reaching people, understanding their needs, and offering something valuable. It's about making a connection. A slow smile spread across Mr. Thompson's face. "That's exactly what I believe. I'd like to offer you a position as an associate on our team. What do you say?" Michael's heart pounded. He could almost hear Mrs. Jenkins' voice reminding him of Joseph's journey, how God had been preparing him all along. He thought about Sarah, about the countless people he had met at the coffee shop, about the lessons in patience, faith, and trust. This wasn't just about a career move. This was a calling. With a steady voice, he answered, "I'd be honored." That evening, as he walked home under the glow of streetlights, he felt a deep sense of peace. Change was coming, but it no longer scared him. God had been with him in the waiting, in the uncertainty, and he would be with him in this new season. Before going to bed, he opened his Bible and landed on Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Michael smiled. He was finally beginning to understand. Michael's first day at Horizon Marketing Group was unlike anything he had experienced before. The office buzzed with energy. People on phone calls, teams gathered around whiteboards brainstorming ideas, and computers displaying campaigns in progress. It was a far cry from the quiet, comforting atmosphere of the coffee shop. As he settled into his new desk, he felt the weight of the unknown pressing on his shoulders. The imposter syndrome crept in. Was he really prepared for this? Did he have what it took? Before he could spiral into doubt, Sarah's words from the coffee shop echoed in his mind. How do you stay hopeful when things are uncertain? He had told her it was about trusting that God wasn't finished with his story. Now, he had to believe that for himself. His first task was to assist in planning a major campaign. Mr. Thompson gathered the team in the conference room and outlined their clients' needs, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping at-risk youth. Michael listened carefully, his hands jotting down notes, but his heart stirred at the purpose behind the work. During a break, Mr. Thompson pulled him aside. How are you feeling? Overwhelmed yet? Michael exhaled a chuckle. A little. But I like that this campaign has meaning beyond just selling something. Mr. Thompson nodded, pleased. That's why I brought you on. You have a way of seeing beyond numbers. You understand people, and that's what great marketing is about. As the days passed, Michael began finding his rhythm. He spent hours learning the ropes, asking questions, and absorbing as much knowledge as he could. He made mistakes, misjudging deadlines, overcomplicating presentations, but each time, he learned and improved. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but he was growing in confidence step by step. One evening, as he packed up to leave, he received a text from Sarah. Got the job. Thanks for your encouragement. A smile spread across his face. He thought back to their first conversation and realized something profound. His journey wasn't just about finding success. It was about lifting others along the way. That night, he reflected on Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Even when he didn't understand the process, God had been aligning each step. The coffee shop, the conversations, the lessons in patience. It had all led here. Michael had settled into his role at Horizon Marketing Group, but the real test of his faith was just beginning. The initial weeks had been filled with learning and small victories, but now he was handed his first major project, a high-profile campaign that would determine his future with the company. The pressure was immense. Late nights became the norm as he juggled presentations, strategy meetings, and endless revisions. Doubt gnawed at him. What if I fail? What if I let everyone down? He longed for the simple days at the coffee shop, where the stakes weren't so high. One evening, exhausted and frustrated, he called John. Man, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Every time I think I've got it figured out, something goes wrong. John's voice was steady. You remember how nervous you were on your first day at the shop? But you showed up, you learned, and now look at you. This is just another step. Don't let fear make you forget how far God has brought you. Michael closed his eyes, breathing deeply. John was right. He had overcome obstacles before. He just needed to trust that he wasn't in this alone. The next day, he arrived at work with renewed determination. He poured himself into the project, leaning into the wisdom of his team, asking for guidance, and trusting that God was leading him. The campaign launch day came, and as he stood before the boardroom filled with executives, he felt a calm wash over him. Lord, be with me. He spoke with confidence, sharing his vision, weaving in stories that connected the brand with its audience. When he finished, there was silence, then a slow nod from Mr. Thompson. Well done, Michael. This is exactly what we needed. Relief flooded through him. He had done it. More importantly, he had grown, not just as a professional, but as a person who trusted in God's provision, even in uncertainty. That evening, he reflected on James 1:2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. He was beginning to understand that challenges weren't obstacles. They were opportunities to trust deeper, grow stronger, and step into God's purpose. Michael's success on the campaign had given him newfound confidence, but with it came unexpected challenges. His work was getting noticed, and soon he found himself at a crossroads. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson called him into his office. "Michael, I've been impressed with your work. There's a new opportunity opening up, a senior position. It would mean more responsibility, bigger clients, and of course, a significant pay increase. But it will also require more of your time. Think about it." Michael's heart pounded. This was everything he had been working toward, yet something inside him felt unsettled. He thanked Mr. Thompson and left the office, his mind swirling with questions. That evening, he met up with John at the coffee shop. "It's a great opportunity," Michael admitted, "but I don't know if it's the right one. I feel like I've finally found balance, purpose. Would taking this position mean losing that?" John sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "You remember when you were at a standstill waiting for any door to open? Now you have choices, but not every open door is meant to be walked through. Have you asked God what he thinks?" Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I've been so caught up in the excitement, I haven't stopped to pray." That night, he got on his knees. "Lord, I don't want to chase success if it means losing the purpose you've given me. Show me the path you want me to take." The next morning, he opened his Bible and landed on Matthew 6:33. "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." A deep peace settled over him. He knew what he had to do. Later that day, he sat across from Mr. Thompson. "I appreciate this opportunity more than I can say, but I have to decline. My time, my energy, I need to keep them focused on what really matters." Mr. Thompson studied him for a moment before nodding. "I respect that, Michael. Most people would have jumped at the chance without a second thought. But knowing what truly matters, that's wisdom." Walking out of the office, Michael felt lighter. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew this. Success wasn't measured by titles or salaries. It was measured by walking in step with God's plan. Michael stood at the coffee shop counter, looking out at the bustling street outside. It had been months since he had turned down the senior position at Horizon Marketing Group, and yet he had no regrets. Life had taken on a new rhythm, one built on trust, purpose, and an unshakable faith in God's plan. As he prepared a cappuccino for a customer, the door chimed and Sarah walked in, her face beaming. "Hey, stranger. You busy?" Michael laughed. "Always, but I can spare a few minutes. How's the new job?" She pulled up a chair. "It's been incredible. I never thought I'd be in a position where I truly feel like I'm making a difference. And honestly, it started with that conversation we had." Michael leaned back, humbled. God has a way of placing us where we need to be, even when we don't see it at first. She nodded. "Speaking of that, I heard you turned down a huge promotion. What made you do it?" Michael took a deep breath. "Because I realized that success isn't about climbing a corporate ladder, it's about walking in obedience to what God calls us to do. I thought I needed that job to prove something to myself, but what I really needed was to trust that God's plans are greater than my own." Sarah smiled. "That's powerful. So what's next for you?" Michael glanced around the coffee shop, the place where his journey had taken an unexpected turn. I don't know yet, and for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that. Just then, John walked up, wiping his hands on a towel. Actually, I might have an idea. I've been thinking about expanding the shop, starting a second location, maybe even a community outreach program, and I need someone with a heart for people to help run it. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He had prayed for clarity, and here it was. He exchanged a look with John, and in that moment, he knew. "I'm in," he said, the words coming naturally. John grinned. "I had a feeling you'd say that." That night, Michael sat on his small apartment balcony, looking up at the stars. He opened his Bible to Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Tears welled in his eyes. The journey had not been easy. There had been setbacks, doubts, and moments of fear. But through it all, God had been faithful. Michael had started this journey searching for a job, for stability, for purpose. What he had found was so much more. He had found faith.